Dana White just ruined the best UFC match in history. Historically, the UFC have been known as a company that significantly underpays their fighters compared to other sports, with some UFC fighters bringing up their frustrations with the lack of support coming from the UFC, whether it be the lack of financial support, the lack of any sort of healthcare provided in literally the most violent sport today, and not even taking care of accommodation to get to the fights.
And I wanted to follow up on something that kind of came out, was about you paying for your own airfare. Are you paying for the whole thing, kit and caboodle?
Well, I'm not the smallest human, so it is better to fly up the front. But the flights, we should all fly business, just quietly, but that's another conversation.
Also, before we get there, I'm trying to hit 100 subscribers by the end of February. So if you can, please like and subscribe, because I need to get some subscribers. I'm at 14 subscribers right now. I mean, it really is gross that the UFC always seems to go out of their way to make sure that they can cut their fighters from as much as they possibly can. Even back with the infamous Reebok deal, which basically stripped all fighters from making any money from sponsors on their clothes. And it also ruined ring walks and fighters having their own unique style when they fight. I mean, it's really bad when Jake Paul is making valid points against your company. And now he's even starting his own Super League in the PFL where fighters are getting 50%. Do you know what that means? That means that even after giving half of the total revenue to the fighters, it still makes sense business-wise, because nobody's giving out that much money on a financial endeavor without at least some confidence that they're gonna get a return on their product.
Coming for it, Ken. I'm coming for the money, you piece of shit.
But nothing hurts more than when the UFC's greed for money gets in the way of fans watching the best fights possible. And with the confirmation of Francis Ngannou leaving the UFC, all UFC fans across the globe were robbed of the chance of seeing Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. After an entire year of negotiations, the UFC couldn't offer a fair enough contract to make Francis stay within the UFC. I mean, looking over Francis's last few fights, it looks like the most he's ever earned in one fight is $600,000 of just pure base salary, with the average total of Francis's pay rounding up to around $400,000 to $500,000 per fight throughout his career. Which might sound a lot, but this is the most dominant heavyweight in the UFC. And when you compare it with other sports, it really shows how much the UFC are underpaying their fighters. Let's take, for example, Anthony Joshua, who's probably one of the biggest names, if not the biggest name in boxing right now. And in his last fight, and mind you, it happened in Saudi Arabia, so maybe these numbers are a bit bigger than usual, he's reported to have made $120 million. To be fair, when we're making points, we have to realize that Anthony Joshua is the face of boxing, or one of the faces of boxing. So let me give you another example that might make it a bit more clear to highlight the disparity between boxing and the UFC. Take Robert Whittaker, for example, a fairly well-known headliner, been involved in one of the biggest rivalries in the sport between him and Israel Adesanya. His average base salary is around $300,000 for a fight. Now let's compare that to someone that is significantly less accomplished in their own individual sport. Let's take Conor Benn. Now never mind his steroid shenanigans, but Conor Benn is only a prospect in boxing right now. He's never had a single world title, and only recently in his last few fights has been headlining his own cards. In his fight against Chris Algieri, he had $600,000 as his base salary, more than 55% of the pay-per-view buys, which gave him a total for one fight, just one fight, of $1.2 million, right? This is a prospect in boxing compared to an established champion in the UFC, and him fighting not for a belt, just to fight, is double a UFC champion. But Dana White's greed got the best of him,